Hello and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Realm of Unknown podcast, your go to podcast for all sorts of weird, mysterious, and bizarre things in the world, and a lot of pauses in between. I do apologize for that. Anyone who has listening over the past several months has been a dedicated follower or what have you. This is a kind of hectic time right now, and I'm in the middle of preparing for a move coming up. Work's been insane. Work's been insane. That's like a whole other story I won't ever even get into because it's just meh. But yeah, so if you are new to this place, if you're new to the podcast, new to the show, essentially it's your pretty typical paranormal type podcast that talks about additionally just weird stuff in the world. However, when it comes to paranormal things, I do kind of like to focus on stuff within my area of the world, specifically Pennsylvania, the Northeast of the United States, and like the East Coast general area. I'm not an expert in any of these things. I just find it interesting because growing up, I actually didn't really hear of most of these stories, to be fair. Obviously, you have the pretty typical ones since I live in or around Philly most of my life. So, it's filled with Eastern State, Fort Mifflin, all that sorts of stuff. But getting further out into the state of Pennsylvania in general, you kind of tend to see way more bizarre, way more freaky type stories, essentially. Because you start getting into like the Appalachia area, you get into Western PA, like Northern PA has some kind of weird stuff going on with it as well. But there's just a lot of strangeness, and Pennsylvania is huge to put into perspective for people out there who are not aware of the general area. If I were to drive from Philly, where I'm at, which is at the bottom right-hand corner of the state, and I were to drive to another city, Erie in PA, which is pretty much like in the top left corner of the state, with good travel and no traffic, that's about like a, I don't know, 7-hour drive and like roughly 300 miles or so. So to put that into the ethos for anyone, especially like European listeners who are like, it's not that big. It's pretty big. So stories range and, demographics and geography. The state's pretty diverse in a lot of ways. Well, not with people really, but still, ignore. Yeah, PA is a weird state. But when it comes to the stories, I should say. So why am I rambling? Why am I talking about PA? We talk about PA all the time. What's going on? So for this month, and I think I announced it last episode when I kind of had like a recap episode. For the month of May, I'm going to be uploading specific stories from Pennsylvania, honing in on bizarre creatures and cryptids that call the Commonwealth of PA its home. Now, I did have one on the list that is not going to be talked about because a very large podcast literally talked about it like the last month of April, and I was very annoyed because I was like, oh, this will be fun. But no, we're going to ignore that one, and we're going to be talking about 4 others. I'm going to be uploading 2 episodes this week. So the first one today should be coming out on, I believe, a Tuesday Tuesday's like the 10th coming up. Then the other one I will be releasing either on Thursday or Friday, depending on editing schedules. And again, all of these are from Pennsylvania. I tried to keep them as ranged as possible, as well as focusing on different areas of PA. Again, it's kind of the same once you get out of the cities. It's all kind of like farms, mountains, woodlands, small little towns here and there. And most of those towns kind of feel the same. But I'm trying to add a little bit of nuance in between the types of creatures that we're going to talk about. And without further ado, that leads us into the very, very first creature that we're going to be talking about this month, and that is the Albatwitch. And a quick heads up, I will probably be pronouncing a lot of these things incorrectly, but whatever. Pronunciation for me is whatever. But the Albatwitch is what we're going to be talking about today, and it is Pennsylvania's very own Bigfoot variant, which I found very interesting because I'd never heard of this before. However, the only caveat here, and it sounds pretty on par for PA, is the fact that it is not very big at all. Like, of course, our variant is like not actually a Bigfoot. It has pretty average height, and it's honestly not even taller than myself, and I'm only 5'7", so it's pretty short. So the Albatwitch itself leans a bit more into the more mythical side of things rather than a mysterious type creature. And again, it's PA's very own like mini Bigfoot type cryptid. Regardless, though, of how silly that might seem, it actually has its very own festival named after it in Columbia, PA, which, if you're not familiar, is located within Lancaster County, which honestly is not that far from where I'm at now. It's not too far away from Philly. It's relatively short trip. So let's get into sightings. Let's get into the story and the legend of the Albatwitch. Sightings of the Albatwitch reportedly describe the creature as being very, very slender, averaging between 4 to 5 feet in height. It is described as an ape-like creature covered in reddish-brown hair. The Albatwitch is not to be mistaken with a juvenile Bigfoot, which a lot of people kind of classify it as. It's very much its own thing. The Albatwitch have more of a neck. It's more pronounced, different to how Bigfoots kind of have really no difference between their shoulder to their head, more gorilla-like, essentially. And they're much skinnier. They're very similar to human-like proportions to them. Again, though, being a bit shorter. So think of like a super hairy middle schooler, I guess, or like cartoon stick character, like Twig Arms. It's very bizarre. They also tend to spend a lot of time up in the trees rather than roaming on the grounds within the forest that they reside in. So legend also says that the Albatwitches either became extinct or were driven near extinction in the later years of the 19th century. So legend believes them to very much be a species of their own, again, that had ups and downs in their population, and then obviously when more people came into the area, they began to decline a little bit. So Chickee's Rock is where these creatures supposedly live, or at least in relation to the legend itself. And the location itself actually does have a tradition, or I should say what's the correct word for this? A sort of general understanding that strange stuff occur there, whether it be sightings of this weird creature or just odd sounds off into the night. And for anyone who needs reference for what the heck Chickee Rock is, or Chickee's Rock, it's literally spelled chick with plural. It's actually a location within Columbia, PA. It's kind of like a park type area, essentially. It's not a specific rock. Okay, let's get back to that. And in the 1950s to the 1970s, we're just generally talking about the Chickee's Rocks area. A man-like figure out of the woods was supposedly reported several times in that area, and local legends speak of, again, bizarre sounds, such as the crack of a whip being heard off into the woods late at night. Whether these stories are connected or not to, the several sightings of Bigfoot-like creatures that were recorded in the area, it's kind of debated. I think people essentially just lump them together. The idea that, hey, these mini Bigfoot are seen in this general area, and we also have bizarre stuff happening in this general area. It's probably the same thing. But again, it's not really solid. No one really knows the connection between the two, and it's just kind of lumped together, to say the least. Furthermore to all this, there were vague reports concerning the sighting of a hairy humanoid-like creature that came from Lancaster, PA in 1973. Now, for people who are not from the area, Lancaster is not what we mentioned before with Lancaster County. It's a town as well. To put into relative perspective, it's about 10 miles or so east from Columbia, which is the central point for where most of the Albatwitch stories come from. So this is another report, comes from the town of North Anvil, which is about 20 miles north, that same year, so 1973. In addition, there were numerous reports of that surfaced out of the neighboring county over in York, PA. And the creature itself, the Albatwitch in general, has stories that supposedly date back roughly 400 to 500 years ago, relating to the Susquehannock tribe, who were a native tribe that inhabited the area around Chickee's Rock in the eastern shore of the Susquehanna River. Unfortunately, though, for this tribe, as many in this area occurred with, thanks to colonial meddling, the tribe itself ended up going extinct in the end of the 1700s. It's not like an end-all be-all technically. There are reports of scattered, like, partial descendants that believe to have or I should say, believed to still exist in Oklahoma, because as colonialists, they pushed everyone out, and that's one of the areas where some of the natives of this region ended up. It sucks, but unfortunately, it happened. But the Albatwitch sightings and the stories that we're going to be talking about overall come from this specific tribe of the Susquehannock Native Americans. So I'm going to talk about two individuals now that have either specific relation to the Albatwitch or were researchers in the Columbia, PA area that have studied it or have reports. And there are definitely two of the more like leading figures. I believe that the ones who actually started the festival, or at least one of them did. So first off is Christopher Vera, who is the president of the Columbia Historic Preservation Society. And he explains about the tribe's naming of the creature as the following. Quote, "The Susquehannock named it Albatwitch after the apple witch," which spelled WHICH. This is a new sentence. I can't specifically pinpoint as to what this is, the quote-unquote apple witch. I cannot tell if this is like a separate entity and they're therefore naming it because of it, or if this name is just on its own. But the Albatwitch does have some relationship with apples, so perhaps they're literally just both the same thing, and it's confusing. It's very confusing. Furthermore, though, there are some other tales that might be a similar creature. The Algonquin tribes also told stories and tales of a small, hairy, humanoid creature, which was called the Megumoasu. And I literally could not find pronunciations for this word anywhere, so I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, but sorry. Someone should have... if you're going to yell about that one, don't, because there literally is no one that announces that at all. But it's a very similar creature in their lore, so people might think that it's one of the same. However, in this particular one, this creature is more so seen as like a fae or fairy type thing, like very much like a spirit of the forests, rather than the more ape-like description of the Albatwitch, which, again, that specific word and that specific description is pretty tightly tied to the Sasquatch. So it's debated if they are the similar thing. Chances are they probably aren't, but again, I don't know. No one really seems to know. Okay, so the next figure that I want to talk about in relation to this story, in relation to the creature itself, is a Rick Fisher. And Rick is the curator of the Columbia-based National Museum of Mysteries and Research Center. And he notes that the Susquehannocks also had a, quote, ape-like creature depicted in their war shields. And the quote continues by saying, "We're not really sure if they had a belief in some ape-like creature or where they got the image from. Perhaps it was just a warlike image to ward off enemy tribes and had no deeper meaning." This is like a keynote as to why people attribute this story to this specific tribe because of their imageries. But again, we don't really have enough evidence to say definitively why they did this or what it is actually depicting. So we just discussed like the local stuff. We discussed the more original native relations to things. However, the creature's association with apples, which is the thing I mentioned like a little earlier on, and as to like essentially where the name came from, that appears to be a bit more recent in history, and oddly enough, has more of a European influence woven into the stories. Fisher specifically says that the Albatwitch gained the reputation of loving and being associated with apples in the late 1800s, which is well after the natives would be gone of that area. This is when Chickies Rock was a very popular picnic spot that afterwards, I should say, became a popular picnic spot after the completion of a trolley line that ran into Columbia, Columbia, PA. Fisher is quoted as saying the following: "These creatures, the Albatwitch, which come out of the trees and steal apples from people who are picnicking there. They would eat the apples and throw the cores back down onto the people." Further adding to this European influence, the name Albatwitch is actually believed to be a Pennsylvania Dutch or Pennsylvania English compound of the word apple snitch, which makes a little more sense, but again, it's debated. We don't really know. So this is like an alternative idea as to how this story came about. And keep in mind, again, the whole apple relation did not start until the Europeans. Like 200 years after the Europeans were like fully established here. And for people who are not familiar with when I say the Pennsylvania Dutch, if you're not from PA, you might not know it, but if you are, you might. So the Pennsylvania Dutch is a name given to descendants of old German immigrants into here in PA. And some examples of Pennsylvania Dutch groups, they're very like religious, essentially. They have like their own practice, their own beliefs. If you're familiar with the Amish or the Mennonites, those are examples of Pennsylvania Dutch. They're broken into much more refined groups. There's like the Old Dutch, the New Dutch, all that. But keep it just for people's reference, it kind of stems from like German immigrants to the area. And if you look up the German, or if I should say, if you look at the German origins of the name, you can come up with a phrase like apple elf, elf spirit, or like escaping spirit. Like it has the name Albatwitch has some derived meanings with like mystical stuff. So people kind of lean into that being possibly the origin of the name of this alleged creature. So both of the researchers that we just talked about, again, Fisher as well as Vera, which we talked about a little earlier, both of them mentioned also that to have actually their own modern accounts and reports of Albatwitch sightings. Vera said that while he was a boy, a friend reported an encounter in the early 1980s when, quote, "This creature came eye to eye with him and pinned him to a tree. His brother yelled at the creature, scaring it off as it ran back into the woods." Fisher, who, keep in mind, is also a paranormal researcher and investigator for several years, so might have some bias. I don't know. I do not know the man. Said that he encountered something that looked similar to the generally accepted description of what the Albatwitch looks like. Again, a like 4 to 5 foot tall, hairy, Bigfoot-like creature. It's like a monkey, essentially. He witnessed his encounter on Valentine's Day in 2002. He was driving along Route 23 near Chickies Rock. Again, it's a park. Earlier on a cold February morning, Valentine's Day, when he had a strange encounter with the creature on the road. in the distance, he saw what appeared to be a person walking out across the road. And as Fisher got closer and closer, he slowed down significantly because the person looked small enough to be a child, so he was concerned that someone was in the road. Fisher writes, quote, "A stick-thin figure about 5 feet tall covered in hair," as he describes the creature in the road. When Fisher flipped on all his lights, his high beams, to get a better look, the hairy figure quickly turned, faced his car, and he could see it had yellow eyes staring at him. And within an instant, the figure just vanished. Like, apparently it vanished like a ghost, because Fisher describes it as literally just disappearing in the middle of the road. And he claims that he later learned that that is an Albatwitch, but I don't know, because none of the Albatwitch stories really have it being a type of spirit. Now, the Algonquin tribes, like, similar type creature is more spirit-like. Again, though, I mean, people debate constantly whether or not Bigfoot is a spirit or an interdimensional creature. Who knows what the actual Albatwitches are? But that's just one of the more significant reports of one from a researcher in the area. Again, though, both Vera and Fisher are the ones who create the Albatwitch Festival. So maybe keep that in mind, because that's a little, I don't know. If you're running a festival for your town and you're also having reports of the creature that you're having a festival for, it's, for me, I have like a tad bit of hesitation. Now, that's pretty much it for the story itself, but I do want to talk about, if you are in the area of Columbia, PA, they've been hosting this festival for several years now. They host it every year annually. It's pretty much, if you're familiar with the Mothman Festival over in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, it's very, very similar, but obviously on a lot smaller scale. The Albatwitch is nowhere near like nationally known as the Mothman is, especially within paranormal corners. But the event, from what I can understand, is still going on. So if you are in the PA area, if you are visiting Lancaster County, if you're near Columbia, PA on October 8th of this year, you know, if you want something kind of festive-y, something autumn, sort of like autismal type, fun, spooky thing, maybe consider swinging by. I mean, even if you're in Philly, let me see how far away Philly is from Columbia, because I'm pretty sure it's not that far. Give me one sec. Oh, yeah, it's easy. So if you are in Philly and you're like, hey, I want to do like a quick little trip, Columbia, PA is right near York, again, right near Lancaster. It's only about hour and a half drive. So it's like 90 miles. I mean, if you're going to the shore, if you're going to the Jersey Shore, it's like the same distance. Like, if you're going to make a trip, go there, have fun. It's like a little day thing. Go in the morning, spend the afternoon there, get dinner, and then head home. So yeah, that's that's the Albatwitch, Pennsylvania's very own mini Bigfoot, apple-loving cryptid that, you know, has a festival and that locals love and may or may not have relations to Native Americans and may or may not have relations to Europeans. Who knows? Regardless, though, I think it's just a fun story that locals have kind of spun into a local legend that gives them a bit more of a sort of history and identity, and I think that's fun and neat. Obviously, if it's appropriated in any way, that sucks. But I think at this point, so many people have their hands in what this might or may be that I really would just say the Albatwitch is like everyone's at this point, because it's so debated who actually made it. And it's just a fun thing. It's a neat little miniature Bigfoot that's running around stealing apples and throwing them at people once he's done. It's a fun story. So that is all for the very first installment for the cryptids that we are going to be talking about this month of May here at Realm of Unknown. I hope you guys did enjoy. I know it's a little weird. It's a bit of an odd structure, and hopefully it gets a bit more refined as we go through. But, we're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving the show, and I do hope you guys enjoyed the story. I've got 3 more fun ones that are coming, and a much longer list of other options, but I had to hone it down. But otherwise, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys wish to support the show in any way, please feel free to. If you want to leave a review, you can do so over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to your podcast. It would really mean a lot. And if you do wish to support the show a bit more and wish to get some goodies in return, consider checking out the Patreon. That's patreon.com/realm of unknown. There's a $1, $3, and $5 tier list that will get you a variety of behind the scenes goodies, extra bonus episodes, weekly bonus episodes, and monthly polls and interactions with the community as you so wish. Again, that's patreon.com/realm of unknown. And check out some shows coming up. It's not released for this episode, so I'll announce it for the next ones. But there's some stuff that I might be being a part of coming up soon. I might be guest recording on other podcasts, and I have some submissions for other ones as well. So I will be sure to leave those for you guys to go check out once they are officially released. Otherwise, I hope you guys are having a wonderful end of spring into early summer. And I shall see you next time, which will be later this week, as we talk about another bizarre creature of PA. Until then, have a wonderful time, and remember to stay spooky.